Thank you so much for coming today. This is going to be an awesome power hour talking about all things that I love, which is hiring strategy. Let me tell you a little bit, for those that don't know me, who I am and why I'm talking about this subject. I'm Sarah Piper, and I'm the founder and director of a business called Invisible Partners. Invisible Partners work in the talent space. We work with organizations to help them solve a whole raft of people-related issues, mostly related to recruitment and hiring. And we have developed a hiring strategy that we use for ourselves, that we use to onboard all of our talent partners. And we also use with our clients. So this is a hiring strategy that if you're going to engage us, we would do a version of. So just for those that are joining just now, if you pop your microphones on mute and your videos on non-showing, and then at certain points throughout the presentation, I'm going to invite you to pop your microphones back on and ask questions. So Invisible Partners is my business. This is what we do for a living. This is what I'm passionate about. But why is hiring strategy so important when it comes to recruitment? So if you just pop your microphones off for the time being, anybody that's joining just now, that would be really great. Thank you so much. Sorry to be distracted with muting people. Margie Grundy, could you just pop yourself on mute, my friend? And that would be great. So hiring strategy. Hiring strategy is so important. Let me tell you why. There are so many engagements that we've been brought into to look at a people-related issue that I can tell you we can reverse engineer back to not having the hiring thinking done up front. So whether we're asked to explore and investigate a problem around employee engagement, employee retention, culture, performance, organizational performance, it's almost always the result of thoughtlessly hiring. So not hiring without thinking and rigor in that hiring decision. You bring on people that are bad fit for the team, of course it affects culture. You bring on people that are not equipped to do the role that you're doing, then of course it affects culture, it affects performance, which then has an impact on retention. So doing the thinking work about hiring strategy and the overarching framework that we'll talk you through today will have a massive impact, not in just attracting people and kind of trying to resolve this challenging market that we're all in of lots of demand and not very much supply. It will help you to, it will impact your retention, it'll impact your culture, it'll impact your engagement. And I truly believe, and evidence would show me through the engagements that we've been lucky to be on, it will impact the performance of your company when done right. So it couldn't be more fundamentally important and linked to organizational success. It's not just a recruitment problem, it's an organizational problem. So I'm really happy to see some of the attendees today. Some are from the talent space, which is brilliant. I'll talk to some of the challenges faced by recruiters, specifically recruiters. Anybody that's just joined, if you could pop your microphone on mute, I'd be really grateful. Thank you. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the challenges faced by specifically the recruitment community, but then I'll also talk about how hiring strategy is a shared responsibility and what everyone in an organization can do to affect this topic. So hiring strategy couldn't be more important and is a massive passion area of mine. We did some great work, or Lauren, who's helped me to organize the event, our head of marketing, asked you the question around what are the problems you're trying to solve. So I have got this front and center in my deck, and I'll make sure that this hiring framework I'm going to share with you today hits these notes, talks about the areas that you're finding difficult right now. So attracting people, it is an incredibly difficult market. I can't change the massive demand in terms of hiring that we are all facing and the short supply, talent shortages. What I can do with this hiring strategy is make sure that you're positioned for success and you're putting your best foot forward, that you are the employer that individuals are choosing. We can definitely talk about what a value proposition is beyond salary expectation and how to communicate that. It will definitely, having the right hiring framework in place definitely is going to impact your time to hire and reduce it. And there's no doubt that EVP and employer branding has a massive impact on reducing time to hire, which we're going to talk about. Securing staff, obviously that's the name of the game, and educating people who are in a hiring position, and then, you know, making sure that you're remarketing to a talent pool and you've got great conversion through that. So yeah, that is some of the things that you've talked to us about having as areas of concern and pain points, and we're definitely going to address this through the presentation today. Through the 110 years that I've been in recruitment, feels like that sometimes, I have developed a framework that I've rolled out through Invisible Partners that are the building blocks, in my opinion, that contribute to a successful hiring outcome. You'll notice the recruitment campaign, so when you flick up the advert, is number 6. There's 5 steps that I believe are fundamental to consider and to finesse before you even thinking about the hiring bit. So these 5 steps that we'll talk about today, and then 6 and 7, are the thinking work that you do to make sure that your structure is right, to make sure that how you assess and measure a hire is appropriate, to make sure that your kind of always on campaign around your employer positioning is out there, so the consideration is high when people come to thinking about their next employer. We're going to talk a little bit about what you're looking for. So actually, what do you need in a role? What's nice to have? What's essential? How you evaluate those things, and how then, of course, you market the role that you're trying to recruit for, and some overarching optimization considerations. So this is the 7-step hiring strategy that we use and that we're going to walk you all through today. There's going to be 3 moments in this presentation where I stop the presentation, flip over to you for 5 minutes to ask any questions, give me any feedback, because I want to try and make it as interactive as possible, but I do want to keep you to the hour that we're committed to. So let me do my best to do both of those things. So we might be a little bit time driven. Okay, let's dive in. Organizational design is the first step, and I'm going to read this quote to you, which I think articulates why it's important. In 1962, President John F. Kennedy visited NASA for the first time. During his tour of the facility, he met a janitor who was carrying a broom down the hallway. The president casually asked the janitor what he did for NASA, and the janitor replied, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon." This is so clarifying the link that individual, that janitor, has to the organizational mission, the level of motivation that gives the individual to know his contribution to the organizational direction. And it's so powerful. And I think this quote helps to articulate the first step that I'm going to share with you today around organizational design and role clarity. Organizational design, for those HR practitioners in the room, is a massive discipline, and there is no way that I'm going to talk about this in depth today. All 7 steps have huge depth to them. We're going to talk about them at a reasonably high level because we've got an hour to talk about them. And I'm going to leave you with some considerations to take back to your organization and to explore in more detail as it relates to your organization. But organizational design from a high level perspective is being really, really clear on the mission of your organization. So that if you're a charity, it could be around fundraising. It could be around how many dogs you rehome. It could be around how many children that are vulnerable that you help. For us, for Invisible Partners, our measurement of success, our organizational North Star, is how many organizations we can help to hire better for themselves internally. So that's our North Star. It's really, really explicit and it's clear, and our team linked to that. If you are a SaaS business, it could be around, I don't know, if you're a fintech business, could be around making the finance experience more easeful and making sure that there's a number of people that you're looking to help on in that journey. So being absolutely clear about what the organizational mission is of the organization you work for. And if you don't know that, if you're in a talent or an HR role and you don't know that, and that's unclear to you, that's fundamental to prioritize, is understanding what organizational success looks like and how each individual plays a role in contributing to that. That's the gold, having the right people in the right roles, but measured and directed toward the organizational mission. So what does your receptionist do that links to the organizational mission? What does your accountant do that relates and links to the organizational mission? What does every single person in your structure do that relates to the goal of the organization? How are they measured? How are they incentivized? How are they guided and nurtured to having that as front of mind? my business does this. This is how I contribute to helping that business get there. It's so important when it comes to motivation, making sure that that clarity is there. One of the biggest detractors of engagement is not having enough role clarity, having ambiguity around the purpose of your role. And so yeah, I cannot stress this building block of our 7-step framework enough. The other consideration set, which is worth being mindful of when you think about org design, is the component parts that make up business cycle, an organizational cycle. Doesn't matter if it's a not-for-profit or commercial business. There's a component where you're generating ideas. There's a component where you're making a decision about which ideas you center in and go after. There's a component where you're implementing those ideas and actioning them. And there's a component where you're evaluating and analyzing what worked and then feeding that back into the innovation cycle again. It's a worthwhile consideration when you're looking at organizational design in its entirety to identify where as a business or where as a structure you are weak. So where do you fall short and what additional thinking do you need to bolster in your business? So as I mentioned from the top of this slide, it's a big topic, it's a massive discipline, but hopefully those two components to organizational design, clarity around role linked to mission, and then thinking about where you may have deficiencies as a team that you want to bolster, building that into the roles that you are formulating. So that is hiring strategy, step 1. Let somebody else into our room. Number 2 is how you measure. So most talent people that might be on this call will be familiar with time to fill, cost to fill, and they have a place in measuring the success of a talent function, but they don't tell you very much. They don't tell you if your hire was any good, just because you've been quick and inexpensive in hiring that person. And so there's so much more richness in data that you can be informed around. What I'm interested in when I'm being engaged by a business is how good was our hire? So let's fast forward 12 months to evaluating who you've brought into the business, how have they performed, how have they, how evaluating their cultural alignment and their fit in the organization, have they been a good hire? Have they delivered what you set out the role to deliver, and have they met expectation or exceeded them? And so using some, analyzing that data set around performance, have they stuck around for more than 12 months? Have they retained them? And what did the hiring process tell you? So if they haven't performed and if they haven't stuck around, what was it about that hiring process that maybe was missed? And so I think lots of people think about people analytics and measurement and are a little bit stuck because they feel like they don't have the right software in place. They might not have the right HR information system or applicant tracking system. I can tell you right now that most of our clients have nothing. So have no ATS, have no HRIS, but they payroll people. So you've got payroll data. So you can look at things like, is there a pattern around attrition? Is there a moment in someone's life cycle in your business where people leave? And that can tell you things. You can introduce with no fancy software an exit interview stage, which can give you much more richness around why people leave and what you can learn from that piece. You can implement with no fancy software employee surveys, what's working around the employee experience and what could be changed. There's definitely external data that sits around there for lots of organizations through review sites. And then looking at the performance review process of any ilk that your organization might support. What can performance data tell you, and how can you link it back to how you recruited that person, and what worked and what didn't? So there's a whole load of richness, even without a fancy system, that can help you build a picture of what's working in terms of your talent function and how you recruit. You might not have a talent function, so this might be something you're exploring without that dedicated talent function. So understanding the performance of your organization, how you've recruited that person, and then what needs to be changed accordingly. So that's a really good baseline to understand your current state and what needs to be addressed. I'm going to talk a little bit about an example where this really came to life for us in an engagement we were on about 4 years ago, so pre-COVID, when life was more normal than it is now. We were engaged by an aged care business who was doing a fantastic job of hiring people. So they were hiring a volume of people, of aged care workers. And the problem statement they asked us to explore was around retention. They couldn't keep people. And we made an assumption before we started this piece of work that it was probably a culture piece, that there was something wrong in the organization from a cultural perspective or leadership perspective. And then we started to look at the data. We looked at the payroll data, just as I've talked about. We looked at a pattern around attrition. So there was a 6-month mark where people were leaving. We looked at data around workforce planning. And we also did some retrospective exit interviews. So we made the decision to go and contact people that had already left the organization to get some insights as to why they had left, which was at this 6-month mark. And the reality was they weren't getting enough shifts. So they were promised X number of shifts. There was an anticipation of workload around number of shifts that they would get. And the reality was they weren't getting enough. So they weren't actually meeting their expectations from a salary perspective. This was a workforce that was shift-based. And so what we did to help this organization was to apply more scrutiny to what kind of labor they needed, reduce their hiring requirements, and actually give people what they were looking for and what they were being promised in terms of the number of shifts. So, you know, this is a insight that the hiring wasn't the issue. It was actually the planning stage beforehand that the analytics and the data helped us to uncover, that helped this organization keep their staff. Everybody was happy with the culture, so our assumption was wrong, and our data helped us know that. So that is the data piece. Understanding your current state is so important, and making no assumptions about that. And then we get on to the more creative component around employer branding. And I'm very intentionally starting with what individuals want. So what human beings want from their employers right now. This data, these insights have been the result of a year's worth of surveying and research that we have done around what people are looking for and what their priorities are in choosing an employer. And so from the top of this presentation, where you gave us your insights around how do you overcome people's high salary expectations? Of course, some individuals are motivated by money, and that's their primary motivation. Most aren't. I'd say that the surveying work that we've done, salary comes down to like number 4, point number 5. So the current climate means that flexibility is one of the most important things, but it can't just be an empty promise. The key that people are looking for is flexibility that's enabled by the right culture. So what are you doing to set people up to collaborate virtually? How are you supporting genuine flexibility, not just dictating to individuals when they have to be in an office? So I think it's just ensuring that flexibility is there, but how it's being enabled is one of the biggest motivators. Not dissimilar to pre-COVID, one of the biggest drivers for people choosing an employer is having a really interesting problem to solve. Very few people want to shuffle paper for a living. They actually want to be front and center of doing work that has impact and seeing the fruits of their labor and feeling like they contribute and make a difference. And that links back to the organizational design piece and having a linkage to the goal of that organization. So having an impact and having clarity around how this role makes a difference to the organizational direction. People are looking for opportunities to learn and continue to grow. And that's really important to note when we're thinking about a dispersed workforce that's working remotely. How can you as an organization make informed decisions around where people need some coaching, where they have opportunities to develop? And you have to be quite intentional about that. So I think because of the remote setup that we're all enjoying, there's the risk that you don't see where people's development areas might be. So I think it's being intentional around having enough exposure to people so you can coach and develop them. Job security is important, but people are pretty realistic that change is constant. So I think they are just as curious and they have a desire to understand how employers showed up during the pandemic, so how they treated people, how culture was affected during the pandemic. So were they people-centric, or did they have a knee-jerk reaction and lay everyone off? Obviously, people are looking for strong leaders that empower them, that give them appropriate autonomy and give them a sense of aspiration and inspiration. And they're also looking for a culture that supports people bringing their whole self to work. So gone are the days where you've got to hide your other priorities in life. I think it's really important that people are encouraged to bring their whole self to work. And I think there are still organizations that don't get that. In the last 12 months, we've wrestled with some clients that just do not understand that people have a whole life, and we've now become accustomed to incorporating our whole life into the working week. And those individuals that aren't embracing of that are losing out. So culturally, that is what people, or fundamentally, that's what the drivers are that people are looking for from an employer. And then we think about your organization. So in relation to employer branding, we think about your organization and think about getting really clear on your why. So why do people join your organization? Do you know? Do you know why people stay? And do you know why, what is it about your environment and setup that makes people thrive? And you ask these questions of your top performers. You ask these questions of the people that you want to replicate, you want more of. You also want to ask the questions of those leaving. Why are they leaving? What would they change? And do the answers to those questions tell you more about the hire was wrong? Or does it give you some insight about the things that you need to adapt to create a more attractive workplace? And then obviously it's notable and it's worthwhile thinking about your proposition to market, how you compare from a compensation, benefits, and kind of the kind of core parts, the core parts of how you compare. And then what is your competitive advantage, which is not always monetary. In fact, it's often not. If the only thing that you've got to offer is a big whacking big salary, your retention rates won't be there. It's the other stuff that makes people invest and give more of their heart and soul to an organization. So the culture, the leadership, the investment in someone's development, that's the stuff that would form part of your competitive advantage. So there are loads of organizations that think they know the answers to these questions. And then when we start to do survey work with organizations that we're engaged by, there's some surprises in there. They're very rarely are all the assumptions spot on. So if you haven't done this kind of exploratory work within your organization, I'd highly suggest that you do it. And if you've not done it for a while, just check in and make sure those things haven't changed. So that is kind of the pre-work to employer branding, and then we get onto the branding work. So employer branding and EVP are kind of two sides of the same coin. Your employer brand, which is your promise, the purpose of the organization and what you promise an employee and the brand positioning around that. And then your EVP is the stuff that makes it come to life from an employee experience perspective. And there are 5 main areas that underpin EVP, and they're typically compensation, benefits, career pathways, the physical environment or the virtual environment, so the tools of trade, how you're set up to be successful logistically and practically, and the culture of the organization. One of the biggest challenges for EVP and any talent and HR people here and any leaders here, I'm sure would attest to this, is who the bloody hell owns it. EVP is a really awkward, or employer brand is a really awkward topic, and many organizations struggle with which function in a business owns it. If it sits with HR, which is often in organizations seen as a governance and policy and procedure kind of function, often they don't have the resources, capability, or desire to kind of own the more creative and branding oriented components of employer brand. But they have a relationship to it, of course. Then you have marketing, who have got so many demands on their time around lead generation and driving a business forward from a revenue perspective, that they feel ill-equipped and ill-resourced to own employer brand as well. But of course, employer brand and customer brand are completely interlinked. And they have a relationship to one another. So they have an influencing component to this topic. And then you have talent, that if employer brand and EVP aren't set up for success, they're the ones that are whacked over the head for not being able to fill the roles quickly enough and cheaply enough because the proposition isn't strong. And so I think, and they are often the ones with the insight around what the market's looking for and how the brand is being perceived out there. So I think it's really important. There is no right answer. Your organization is going to be structured differently from the next organization. So it's just really important to define who owns it and then who has a contribution to it. The RACI acronym is quite an interesting one to apply to this. Who's responsible? Who has ultimate accountability for it? Who needs to be consulted and informed? And defining who that is for you in your organization, but just ensuring that somebody owns it. But then even although the employer brand component and the communication and execution of that employer brand collateral out there needs an owner, every employee plays a part in EVP and communicating it. I think it's so much more powerful to have employee advocacy, whether that just be sharing a post through to actually giving their voice to their experience. That's so much more powerful than a glossy, centralized proposition. So I think making sure that everybody understands that they are going to benefit from bringing in good people and sharing their voice to the effort is key. And then the other component is kind of the next stage is really the execution of it. Thinking about having an annual content calendar with key notes that you want to hit and having this always on campaign is absolutely fundamental to making sure that when you have a job that you want to hire, you're much more you're positioned for success because people know who you are. They've already noted that they like the cut of your jib, they like your proposition, they like your story. And so when they see your job advert in their feed or they have a tap on the shoulder from a recruiter, they already have said yes because they psychologically have built a relationship with you. So I think that always on campaign is really important. I think a bit like I was talking about earlier around not guessing some of this stuff, making sure that what you're promising and putting out there is actually real. So is what you're promising the lived experience of the candidate experience and the employee experience? And so that's surveying, that data, that asking the questions to make sure that you're being authentic. If you're promising a progressive, innovative, dogs in the office environment, but actually your decision making is really autocratic and not at all contemporary, then just be really careful about what you're promising, because if it's not what people actually experience, then you're going to lose people pretty quickly. And then finally, a final point, and we will send a whole pack of information out about all of this stuff. So I'm going to talk to you about reasonably high level stuff here today, but there will be some more content that will help facilitate some of your internal discussions. I'm also just going to quickly talk about micro brands. Micro brands really in my mind, sit under the employer brand and relate to the kind of audience you're trying to target. And by audience, I mean employee audience. So your accounting target audience versus your software engineer target audience versus your sales target audience are going to be driven by different things, and they're going to be looking for different things in your proposition. There will be some commonality, but there are some differences. And so I think ensuring that the hiring managers and the leaders in your business that have a responsibility for building a team or hiring a team and have direct reports, understanding their role in developing their micro brands. So what does their team what does their team want to be known for? What does their own leadership style want to be known for? Linking KRAs back to them around employer branding and getting behind some of this stuff. And giving autonomy and giving empowerment to those hiring managers to make a statement about what it is to join ABC organization in the accounting team, what it means to join ABC organization in the software development team, what does a value proposition look like for that audience group. So the overarching employer brand and EVP is important, but then how can it be even further personalized to really hit the right note with the audience groups that you're going after? And that would be part of your content calendar and always on campaign, particularly in those hard to fill areas, if there are those functions for you. Now, that is the kind of, that is the moment where I'm going to just stop presenting for a second and stop sharing my screen and ask if anybody wants to ask any questions. I feel really uncomfortable presenting without seeing anybody's beautiful face. And I could just talk for Scotland about all this stuff because I love it. Does anybody want to switch their camera on and ask anything before we go on to the next chunk of the presentation? might not be, and that's okay. Or you can even chat it. You can even chat your question if you prefer to do that. So the three chunks of the steps that I've talked about, which is organizational design, measurement and analytics, and then employer branding, they're the consideration set before you even think about hiring a specific role. And so I've very purposely paused here to see if there's anything that people would like to ask before we lead on to the next bit, which is role specific. Thanks, Harley, for saying. Nice to see you here. No questions. Okay, I will carry on. Just grab a drink. Presenting virtually is a weird experience. Yeah. It's a weird experience because you feel like you're talking to yourself. So nice to see all your names there where I've flicked from presenting mode. Okay, I will go back to talking to myself, and hopefully this content is landing with you all. You talked about in your problem statements, your pain points. How do you overcome the current battle that we're all facing around skill shortages and talent shortages and attracting quality talent? This bit is one of the ways in which you do that. You've got your job description, which I'm sure you guys would all have a version of a job description. But I'd really encourage that you evaluate that job description and challenge yourself. If you are the hiring manager, challenge yourself in these three areas. These are the three areas that make up a successful hire. The skill being the skills and knowledge that somebody has to have before they join your organization to reasonably quickly hit the ground running. There are so many instances where people specify that somebody must have a software language, that somebody must have knowledge of a particular computer package, versus the broader skill underneath that, which is competence with software. So I guess an example of this would be, could you train somebody to use an accounting software that they haven't used before within 4 to 6 weeks? Probably the answer to that is yes, if they've used other accounting software. So specifying that they absolutely essentially have to have that is stopping you attract a whole host of people that could be perfect for your role, but don't have that one tick in the box. And so with a small investment of your time, an investment doesn't need to mean if you're a time poor hiring manager and just are nervous about taking on board another burden in terms of upskilling somebody, you could outsource that upskilling to another training institution or some kind of software, the software that you're talking about, making sure that they have access to training and development on that's individually driven. There are so many instances where you could challenge yourself around what needs to be inherent and what can be taught. And I know the old adage around what's essential versus what's nice to have. This needs to be challenged even more than ever before because of the talent shortages we're all facing. Has somebody done the job that you're asking them to do in a completely different context, in a different industry? How essential is it if you set them on the course of research and information gathering for them to have that? You know, salespeople are a great example. If they have an inherent skill to business develop and network, but they haven't sold into the sector you're trying to get them to sell into, that's totally a transferable skill because the inherent knowledge is selling and business development, not the sector knowledge. Now, of course, it would be great if they came with contacts and were able to bring that network with them, but really challenge yourself about whether it's essential. Fit. So fit's a curious one because it's that kind of elusive cultural fit, which can so easily be code for bias. You know, making sure that people culturally fit into your organization is much more around whether they align with your values, they care about the things that matter to your organization, but they could look different and speak differently and be different and think differently. Hopefully they do think differently to you because you want diversity in thought, and not just diversity in terms of the gender and ethnicity and age, although those things are incredibly important to have diversity and richness in, but it's also just challenging yourself and making sure that you're not just creating an echo chamber of culture fit people. It's making sure that you can recognize where a different influencing style might have an impact in your organization. Not everyone has to have the same influencing style. And so I'd really encourage you to define what culture fit means to your organization. And you can do that through exploring what's not worked and why it didn't work, and making sure that you are embracing all it means to be inclusive in a workplace. And I'm thinking neurodiversity. So culture fit, make sure it's not code for bias. And then motivation is obviously when somebody aligns motivationally to what you're offering. So is what you're offering from a career pathway perspective, a salary perspective, an expectation perspective, in sync with what someone actually wants from their career? And so making sure that you're clear about what you're offering. If you've got a very small company with a flat structure that only has growth within the role itself, not hierarchy, making sure that you're clear around that definition. So once you have established what it actually is that you're looking for, so you're looking for an accountant, yes, but what's absolutely essential in skill, fit, motivation for them to be successful in your organization. Then the kind of pièce de résistance is how you measure it. Now, if anybody is in here, in this room from a talent background, all of these selection tools, you could be kind of rolling your eyes and you'd be forgiven for rolling your eyes going, yeah, I know all that. Of course we do. We know what a conversational interview is. We know what a behavioral interview is. But very regularly, in fact, probably more often than not, we go through these stages and we have a recruitment process that is not very intentional. We go through the process of going through a conversational interview and then another conversational interview and then another meet and greet without really understanding what is it that you're trying to assess with that stage of the recruitment process. What in the previous slide around skill, fit, motivation, is this focused on evaluating. So your phone screen to a certain extent and your kind of a surface level stage is assessing all three of those things, but at a surface level. Your conversational interview, your meet and greet, your press the flesh, having a coffee really doesn't do anything but establish a fit, a connectivity. If you chuck a couple of behavioral interview questions in there that are a bit more robust and data driven and evidence-based, then you might be talking more about motivational alignment and skill alignment. If you're thinking about case studies and tech tests, you're going to see how much time is invested and be able to assess somebody's motivational alignment, but also skill. It might not tell you very much about cultural fit. And the list goes on. So my recommendation to you is when you're crafting your recruitment process, which I would recommend that you do way before you've put the job in market, so you know what you're looking for. Now you're trying to define how you're evaluating those things that you're looking for. How do we evaluate the skill that we've specified as important? How do we evaluate cultural fit? And how are we going to evaluate motivational alignment? You have that consistent process so everyone has the equal opportunity to put their best foot forward. And so I'm a massive fan of consistent recruitment processes, but don't just follow the breadcrumbs. If you have found that in a first interview conversational stage, there was a slight red flag for you in that conversation about something, a skill, a motivational alignment, incorporate another question in your second interview stage that addresses that. So I think it's just about being really intentional, agreeing up front who are your decision makers in this recruitment process. Any talent people in here will have experienced let's just get them to meet the CEO at the end of the process, and the CEO has got a different view to everybody else. Now, if he is core to the decision-making panel from the get-go, make sure that he is engaged in the journey, that you have his priorities on board, and you have those specifications and those criteria incorporated in what you're evaluating and what you're presenting in terms of the right candidates. So define your recruitment process, stay consistent, but be nimble to explore things and incorporate things that are specific to a candidate that you have in front of you. The other comment I'd make around hiring process is make it swift, make it streamlined. Candidate experience is everything. Right now, candidates are choosing you as an employer, not the other way around. They've got 3 to 6 opportunities that they're straddling at any one time. So they are choosing you, make no mistake. And if you make it a long, drawn out, laborious, ambiguous recruitment process, they're not going to select you. So that's pretty key as well. I'm going to give you an example of where all of this kind of part of our recruitment strategy really played out. So we worked very heavily with an energy retailer about 3 years ago who were being challenged with customer service contact center people that were bringing in. So they had an issue with bringing in people that couldn't do the job, essentially. They had a real performance issue and they had a real retention issue. So they asked us to come in and explore why that situation occurred. And so we did a whole heap of deep diving into the recruitment process. So how does the recruitment process evaluate what they were looking for? What are the inherent skills they were looking for, and how are they evaluating that essential inherent skill? And we found that to be a contact center person in energy retail required a reasonably high degree of numerical ability. The tariffs that you've got to get your head around and the ability to navigate tariffs as it relates to individual customer plans. You needed to be on your numbers. I certainly couldn't do it. And the psychometric evaluation, whilst they had one in place as part of the recruitment process, their acceptance level for numeracy was really low. And so the people that they were bringing on board just didn't have the cognitive ability to do the job that they were being employed to do. So we raised that, we encouraged them to raise that to a higher level. They brought in less people, but they stayed and they performed at the level that they were meant to be performing at. So they really hit the mark in terms of performance. They enjoyed it more. So people were leaving because they were finding it all too hard. So by just being really clear about what it is you need, so being really clear on the essential skill you need and being really specific around how you're evaluating that skill will help you ensure that you're landing the right people, not just bums on seats. So yeah, that's what you're looking for, how you're evaluating what you're looking for. Now we're going to get on to the cool kind of marketing component of taking a job to market. So now we've figured out what we're looking for, we know how we're evaluating it, but now we're going to take this job to market. So as I said to you from the outset of this presentation, so many businesses right now are still doing the old thing of flicking up a Seek advert and fingers crossed we're going to fill our job. It's just not going to happen. So you've seen how much content has been talked about so far around what it takes to get the right hire. The briefing is no different. So we've talked about having that PD, evaluating the inherent skills, fit and motivation, but now we've got to paint a picture. If you are advertising your PDs as a job advert, stop doing it now. It tells the person you're marketing to, because this is a marketing effort, it's a marketing campaign, it tells them nothing, it doesn't engage them, it doesn't make them a passive person who might be just trolling through LinkedIn, curious to see what's in their newsfeed that day. It's not going to make them stop what they're doing and go, hey, that's curious, I'm going to find out more about that. So actually going through a briefing process to paint a picture will help you create a campaign that is much more high impact. So these are 5 of our killer questions, or 4 of them, and then a consideration point. How is this role making a difference in your organization? So speaking again to what people care, what individuals care about, and from the previous slide that we talked around what people are driven by right now, linked to organizational mission, how is this role going to have an impact? 12 months in, what has this person nailed in your organization? What are they celebrating? What does success look like in that 12 months initial period? What's the mandate? What are they coming in to fix, change, create? What is someone going to love about the role? What are some of the challenges they're going to have to overcome? No in working environment is Narnia. Is it going to be, is growth going to be the biggest challenge? Is acquisition of new clients going to be the biggest challenge? Is lack of branding? What are they stepping into? What's the current state that they're going to have to navigate to be successful in their role? And then again, stakeholder alignment. Who's got input into the decision making and making sure they're all on board? So that's your briefing process you're going through with your hiring manager if you're in talent. If you're a hiring manager, be really deliberate and think about the answer to these questions. And if you don't know them, if you don't have clarity around what success looks like in 12 months, I'd really challenge yourself about the necessity of the role if there's not a high impact in 12 months. So that's your initial stage around campaign development. And then you're thinking about the talent. So then you're thinking about the person you're trying to attract. Who's your avatar? Where does your person work? What might they be driven by? What might be they frustrated by right now? And whilst writing adverts, there is not one way to write an advert, but so many, and I'm talking 80% of adverts that we see written out there are completely central to or centered around the company. So they're very dry. They're often kind of rejig PDs, and they don't talk at all about the individual that's considering this role and organization. So I completely appreciate what it's like to work in a busy talent function. So if you've got a volume of roles, I understand that it's not necessarily realistic to be sitting navel gazing and thinking about what copywriting skills you can apply to this. So it's absolutely fine to template things and have things that are repeatable, but make sure you've got an emphasis on the opening line and the opening phrase that hits that passive candidate who is not looking, between the eyes to make them think, oh, that's an environment I can see myself in. I am a bit bored. I am frustrated by that thing. Oh, that sounds aspirational. I'm going to throw my hat in the ring, but I didn't think I was going to. So you're really targeting, everyone's a passive candidate, and there are very few active candidates in the market for all the reasons that we know. So a real conservative approach to moving jobs just now. And so it's important that you are creative and impactful with the copywriting you apply to your adverts. And so that's the campaign component. We're nearly nearing the end. I'm going to leave some time for questions. And so we're kind of emphasizing this point. Consider your drivers of the individuals and what they're looking for from employers right now. And then in fact, I'm getting ahead of myself. You've created your copy, you've got your campaign ready to rock and roll. Then you're thinking about, where do your tribe hang out? And because I've just made the statement that most people aren't actively looking, you've got to find them where they're consuming content and not necessarily looking for jobs. So of course, job boards and Seek and LinkedIn have a huge place in sourcing strategy. You've also got to be a bit more, you've got to be smarter and figure out where they're consuming content. We work very actively for an allied health business who've got a really diverse workforce. They've got locations in Gympie and Rockhampton and, you know, Timbuktu. And we really effectively infiltrate Facebook groups that are community-based and talk about local jobs. And so whilst that is not a job board and it's not a job sourcing platform, we meet them where they are. We meet the local community where they are and bring them jobs that they wouldn't ordinarily have thought of because they're not active on Seek and LinkedIn. So I think it's about figuring out where your tribe consume content. If you're looking for high-tech people, designers, software engineers, you're going to those platforms where they consume content. You're not necessarily clumsily feeding them job adverts in those platforms. It's not appropriate, but you are identifying who they are and then using that research and that content to try and shoulder tap them in other mechanisms. So just be really thoughtful about where are you trying to meeting your tribe and people that you're trying to target, where they consume content. And then the final step in our 7-step framework kind of is an overarching comment around where technology plays a role. So all of these things that I've talked about, I'm talking about organizations that might have very little technology. It's not absolutely essential, but there is no doubt Schmick HRIS and ATS helps you make candidate experience automated and helps you incorporate the right tone and voice, make it feel personal, but with very, very low labor investment of time. It's less labor intensive. I'd also make the comment that every process you run through, you're asking yourself, what could I do better? So you're surveying people that have been unsuccessful, you're surveying your hiring management community, you're asking yourselves what could have been done better, and you're flowing that back into the start of your process again. So you're constantly in that mode of continuous improvement. There's definitely ways you can incorporate things like pre-employment checks and there's loads of technology out there. So just being mindful around what budgets you've got around technology and how you can automate some of this heavy lifting. And then the kind of final comment I'd make around a successful hire and finishing off your hiring strategy. Until somebody's started, you've not hired them. There are so many stories of reneging on acceptance of employment offers. Even when they've signed a contract, there's no obligation for them to start. So that employee experience or candidate experience and then onboarding experience is fundamental. The first 6 months, they're high risk. They are still often open to opportunities on LinkedIn. They are still vulnerable to headhunting approaches and vulnerable to the experience that they're still forming a view about whether they've made the right choice. So making sure that you don't do all that hard work around your hiring strategy and then kind of lose it by not optimizing your onboarding and making sure that's really where you want it to be. So that's kind of the 7 steps. Where are we at? We've got 8 more minutes, and then I will move to questions in a second. What we can do to help is all of this stuff. So basically we come into organizations and help you at a strategic level. We can help you from a delivery perspective. And we can also do component parts of your recruitment. If you've got bits kind of down pat, we can do some of it, not all of it. So there's loads of ways you can engage us. But I'm going to stop talking now, hopefully, and then figure out how to stop sharing. I've done that now. And thank you so much for joining me for this hour. And we'll send you some follow-up collateral that might stimulate some more thought.